to be his wife. So Rav Amar Kana Lakol, that in fact is the case. He acquired her as his wife. And again, we're using this language of kana as completion of the marriage. Obviously, I'm not advocating that the marriage is like acquiring a purchase, but in any event, that's the analogy that is often used. And so Rav says that it's a full-fledged marriage. Shmuel Amar lo kana ella ledvarim ha'amurim b'parasha. That when we say that the Yavam has acquired the Yevamah, it's not talking about a full-fledged wife, but rather for certain aspects of the Yibum relationship, namely Lirush b'nichsei achiv. One is to inherit the estate of the brother, as a reminder that when the Yavam performs Yibum, he gets to inherit his brother's estate. He gets to be the only inheritor of the brother's estate. It's not divided. Ulufotra min ha'yibum. And also, the other biblical aspect of performing Yibum is that now no longer is there a Yibum attachment with any of the other brothers or with any of the remaining wives. So as a result, now and then similarly, looking in Rashi about 1, 2, 3, 6 lines down, that if this new husband were to die, the lo banim isha acheres, and he happened to have children from another wife, muteres l'shuk, this new wife would actually go out and be able to marry whomever she wants. She would be a widow who now was a widow of a man who had children, and so as a result, there is no yibum that's left. O im hotzia beget, or if he were to divorce her, lo by a chalitza, he won't actually need to do chalitza with her. O im haisa la tzara niftara b'viyaso shelzo, or if she had a co-wife, again, that co-wife would be able to go out as a result of this sexual relationship, even though it wasn't a completed sexual relationship. It would enable the co-wife to go out and be free.
Is there like a ketubah thing too that has responsibilities for like all the responsibilities? You know what I mean?
Yes. We saw that a couple of days ago that the new husband would have the obligations of of the ketuvah, but for the end result, those financial obligations of the ketuvah are actually on the brother's estate. But of course, again, he inherits the brother's estate, so it's really his funds, but it's based on the brother's estate. And if there is no estate, then he would need to do that himself. I think that it is focusing on the acquisition aspect, and so that is probably why it doesn't specifically mention that.
But he has his own estate too, right?
Yes, he would have it. Yes, the one who performed the Yavam has his own finances as well.
So can he commingle and stuff? I mean, or he has to keep them separate? You know what I mean?
That's a good question. I would think that when it comes to real estate, so that is generally considered separate, even if you commingle, meaning real estate goes back to its original source. In terms of obligations that are upon real estate during the time that it's owned by a person, stay with the property until those debts get paid off. And so as a result, assuming that they're subject to a written contract, effectively all written debts become effectively like a mortgage that runs with the property. So as a result,
there's no debt. Can he pay it from his brother's estate? You know what I mean? Or
so again, if he paid it from his brother's estate, from the real property of the brother's estate, I think, I'm not 100% sure. We still haven't done all of the property laws. That's going to come in Ezekiel, but I believe that it would run with the property, and so he could use the property to pay it off, but it would not extinguish the liability that would still fall to that property if he ran out of other assets. That's my understanding, but I'm not 100% sure. But in terms of non-real property, I believe that it would all effectively become commingled, and I don't think that it would run with those assets. Okay. All right. So so now we're going to qualify, and they're going to have two versions of the qualification of this debate. So again, Rav says they're totally married. Shmuel says they're married at least so that the husband inherits the deceased brother's estate, and he's fulfilled the mitzvah of Yibum, so that as a result, some other co-wife would be able to go free. But Mina Nesuin, if in fact that the first husband was, and now we're going to assume that we're talking about where the brothers are Kohanim. If the first husband had done Nisuin, so L'divrei Akol Achla, then she is able to eat Truma. So one of the key qualities that she would not be able to do based on Shmuel's approach is that she would not be sufficiently married to the Yavam so that she would be able to eat Truma. Rav says that they're completely married, and so as a result, she would be able to eat Truma according to Rav. So, but the Gemara says that actually even Shmuel would agree that if in fact the first husband had done Nisuin with the wife before dropping dead without children, well then, because she was allowed to eat Truma, then we would allow her to eat Truma even based on this inferior performance of the mitzvah of Yibum, because there wasn't a full sexual relationship. Because she had already been eating Truma, so then we'll allow her to continue to do so. So keep pligi mina erison. But where do Rav and Shmuel disagree? That's when the Yibum happened only when Ruvain and Rachel had only done Erison. So Ruvain and Shimon are Kohanim. Ruvain has done Erison with Rachel. Now he dies. Now Shimon does an imperfect Yibum, does not have full sexual relations with Rachel, and so it is only partially married according to Shmuel. And so as a result, then would not be allowed to then Rachel would not be allowed to eat Truma. Rav Amar Acheles. Rav says, and even in that situation, she can eat Truma. Taha Rabbi Rachman Bias Shogeg Kamezid. Because the imperfect in relations, meaning maybe it's unintentional and the like, so then it is considered as if it's intentional, and so as a result, she becomes his full wife, and she's allowed to even eat Truma. Ushmuel Amar Ki Rabbi Rachmana La'ukme Makom Baal. That where did the Torah allow us to equate the two? It is only to the level that the deceased husband had established. So here, the deceased husband had not enabled his wife to eat Truma, and therefore we will not let her eat Truma when the new husband, when the Yavam, only does an imperfect form of Yibum. So la'alumi mibal lo, but we're not going to allow the new husband to be stronger than the old husband, than the deceased husband. And so as a result, since an Arusa is not allowed to eat Truma, and again, incidentally, biblically, as background, biblically, there's no reason that an Arusa should not be able to eat Truma. She's considered married to a Kohen and the wife of a Kohen. And so as the wife of the Kohen, she should be able to eat Truma. But we're worried that because they aren't living together, because you're not allowed to, until they actually get married, they're not allowed to have marital relations, so they should be separate during this period of Arusa. So then she may end up bringing some of that Truma home, and now some of her family may eat the Truma when they're not supposed to. Presumably she's a Bas Yisrael, so she's not allowed to, so she would not otherwise be allowed to eat Truma. So as a result, that's what we're concerned about. And so we say that an Arusa is not allowed to eat Truma. So Ba'az the Shmuel Taimei, and Shmuel goes according to his reasoning, because the Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Rav Nachman said that Shmuel said, Kosha bal ma'achil yavam ma'achil. That anytime the husband enables his wife to eat, so too the yavam will enable his wife to eat. And whenever the husband's not able to enable his wife to eat, so too a yavam's not able to enable his wife to eat. Well, Meisvei, 1 second, there's a brisa that suggests that these two things are not necessarily tied together. Because listen to the following. Bas Yisrael, pakachas shenis arsa lechoen pikeach. That we have, so let's back up and just to note a background point, and that is that if somebody is a cherish, a deaf mute, and they are not considered to have the sufficient das, the sufficient intention, because at that time, of course, it was not realized the capabilities of such a person because there wasn't such an educational system that was available. So they were assumed not to have sufficient intelligence to accomplish any kind of act that requires an intention. And so as a result, such a person is not able to perform Erisin. Now they can perform Nisuin, but they're not able to perform Erisin because you need to have a sufficient intelligence. But he did Erisin, and so now, we're worried. We're going to see that we're worried that if in fact we allow this person who did Erisin while they were not a deaf mute, but now become a deaf mute and are able to perform Nisuin, we're worried that we'll think that would be permitted in connection with that will allow that we would end up allowing this person to marry a woman and have her eat truma, with even if he were a deaf mute from the beginning. So let's take a look and we'll see it inside. So Bas Yisrael pikachas shenis arsa lechoen pikech. We have a fully competent daughter of an Yisraeli, somebody who's not a Kohen, and she does Erisin with a Kohen, who again has his full capacities. But below his speak lechonsa adshenish charish. But before he has a chance to do Nisuin, so now he becomes a cherish, a deaf mute. So Eina Ochel. So even after he completes the marriage, she's not allowed to eat truma. And Rashi explains, right opposite the Hagos Habach on the right hand side, the Gazrina Nisui Cherish Atu Kidushe Cherish Kida Amrina Lakaman. As we will see shortly, we are going to make a gzeira and say that we don't want to allow somebody who marries a deaf mute to be able to eat, to perform and performs Nisuin with a deaf mute to be able to eat, because we're worried that person will also do a Kiddushin with a deaf mute, or somebody else will do Kiddushin with a deaf mute, and we will think that person is allowed to eat, when in fact that's not the case. Because although the rabbis do allow a deaf mute to get married, it's not considered a marriage of the level that allows the wife to eat truma if the husband is a Kohen and she is not. So mace v'nafla lefnei yavam cherish, and now this husband, this deaf mute husband, has died, and now his brother is also deaf mute, and now he is able to perform yibum. And when he performs yibum, ochelet, she's allowed to eat truma. Ubizo yafa koach hayavam mikoach habal. And in this way, the power of the yavam is greater than the power of the husband. Well, 1 second. In Shmuel's statement, he says that the power of the yavam is equal to the power of the first husband. There's no difference. You're not allowed to have us be stronger. So Bishlam Rav Nicha, it all makes sense according to Rav, because he allows the yavam to have greater power, and that even an incomplete level, a non-perfect level of marital relations enables the yavam to be married. El Shmuel kasha, but for Shmuel this is very difficult, because he had said that the yavam doesn't have any abilities above the husband. So how can the husband enable which not enable her to eat truma, and now the yavam enable her to eat truma. That doesn't make any sense according to Shmuel. So Amar Lach Shmuel Ema Hachi. So Shmuel will say that we're missing some words in this brisa, and he'll say, read it as follows: Below his speak lachon sa'achiniskar. So he became a deaf mute before he did nisuin. So Eino ochelos betruma. Then she's not allowed to eat truma. So kanas va'achar kach niskarish. But if in fact he had done nisuin and only after the nisuin he became a deaf mute, so meaning that he had fully married her and then he became a deaf mute, ochelos, then she's allowed to eat truma. And in that case, meaning in the case where the first husband had married and done nisuin before he became a deaf mute, so as a result, that's where meis v'naflu lifnei yavam cherish, that if in fact she falls before a yavam who is a cherish and he performs yibum ochelas, then she's allowed to continue to eat truma. So 1 second, but umay bizo, when we said that in this regard the yavam has more power. But de'ilu bal cherish, so what does that mean? De'ilu bal cherish mikara lo ocheles. Because if in fact the first husband had been a cherish at the time before nisuin, so then she would not be able to eat truma. Ve'ilu yavam cherish mikara achla. But here, this fellow, the yavam, he's a deaf mute from the start, and she's allowed to eat truma. So that's what it means by stronger. It does not mean that the performance of nisuin by a deaf mute first husband enables when the wife can't eat and now he dies. It does not mean that the yavam, who is a deaf mute, will enable her to eat. So it is not. There is no power. It is all that the yavam has that is greater than the first husband in application. So again, okay. So that is the first read of this version of the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. So again, the machlokas was about if they had only done erisin, but if they had done nisuin, everybody agrees that the second husband would enable her to eat truma, even if he were also a deaf mute. V'ika de amri, and so then there are those who say actually it's different. Mina erisin dibriya kol lo achla. Actually, everybody agrees that if there's only erisin, she's not allowed to eat because she wasn't allowed to eat at the beginning, and so as a result, she's not allowed to eat even now. She never ate while the first husband was alive because they had only done erisin; they had never done nisuin. So keep ligi mina nisuin. But where do they disagree? They disagree when they had done nisuin. So Rav Omer Ocheles, Daha Habas Achla Mikara. Rav says she can eat truma because she was able to eat truma with her first husband. Ushmuel Amar, no, Eina Ocheles. She's not allowed to eat truma because Ki Rabu Rachmana Bias Shogeg Kamezid. Because where did the Hashem and the Torah compare a shogeg marital relations to amazing marital relations? The Dvarim Ha'orim Parsha. It is only with respect to the things that are in the Parsha of Yibum, namely the inheritance and the fact that the other women go free. Abalachol mili lo, but not with respect to all aspects of marriage. It is not a full act of marriage if you've only done an inferior form of Yibum. So now we ask the same question. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Kol Shabal Machil Yavam Machil, etc. That we said that the husband and the enables her to eat exactly whatever the first husband was able to eat, and now we see that you're not enabling him to eat because in fact the first husband had done nisuin even, and now Shmuel is saying that even when the first husband did nisuin, the yavam, if he did an imperfect yibum, it will not entitle him to eat. So we'll change Shmuel's statement. It's not a statement that any kind of yibum will enable her to eat, but rather kol bia shahabal machil ba yavam machil ba, that any kind of marital relations that would allow the first husband to have her eat will also allow a yavam to have her eat. And so and any kind of marital relations that does not enable the first husband to enable the wife to eat truma, so too a yavam, in that if they do that kind of marital relations, he will not enable the yevama to eat truma. So
Just a quick question. So according to Rav, though, even if they just did erusin in the beginning, the first husband just did erusin, she could eat truma, right? According
it
to
depends
Rav.
on which version of the machloket. So in version 1 of the machloket, yes, that was exactly what Rav said. But in version 2 of the machloket, Rav says something different. They all agree that if it's just erusin, then no, then you need a full marriage. You need full marriage in order to enable. So a partial an imperfect bia would not enable the woman to eat truma. Right. So the argument between Rav and Shmuel is what happens with an imperfect bia. What happens in that imperfect bia?
And there was erusin, there was no bia.
What?
There was erusin, there was no bia, right?
No, but now we're talking about the yavam. So there was erusin with the first husband, with Ruvain, and now Shimon does an imperfect bia.
What does that mean? What does an imperfect bia mean?
So we'll just deal with the specific situation of Shogeg. That's the easy one. He thinks he's sleeping with his wife, but he's actually sleeping with the woman.
All right, I got it. All right.
Okay. So now we're going to use that same brisa that we challenged Shmuel earlier and challenge him again. So Meisvei Bas Yisrael Pikachas and his Arsalachon Pikeach, below his Piklachon Sa'achin Ischaresh, Aina Ochelas, right? So she's not allowed to eat Truma because he did not yet, because they had not done erusin while he was fully competent. So Meis V'Nafel Yavam Cherish, and now he dies. The first husband dies, and the second and the brother Shimon is also a cherish, and now he does yibum. Ocheles, she is allowed to eat. Ubizo yafa koach yavam mikoach bal, and in this way, she's the second husband is stronger. Well, bishlam ala rav mitaris mikara. Now, if we say that this goes according to Rav, we can answer the answer that we answered earlier, meaning that when we asked the question according to Shmuel, so now we have that same question according to Rav, but we can use the same answer that Shmuel gave earlier for this question. We can answer that question here as well. But El Shmuel kasha. But in fact, for Shmuel, it's difficult because he says that that there's no way that she can engage, she can eat. That because even that there is no, that the imperfect marriage does not allow her to eat in this situation. And so there's no possible way to make it so that the second husband can enable her to eat through an imperfect bia. So in fact, Kasha, you're absolutely right that if you were to use this second version of the machlokas, then this is a difficult problem for Shmuel. So incidentally, we because this is deals with not monetary issues, but issues of what is permitted and what is forbidden. So the halacha is generally like Rav in those situations. Okay, so now we continue with the next piece of the Gemara, and the Gemara is going to quote a brisa. So Tana Rabbanan Bas Yisrael Pikachas Shenis Arsa Lecho and Pikeach. So we have this again a Jewish woman who marries with who engages in erusin with a kohen. So below his piklachon sa'achin ischarish. Again, the same this brisa, that same kind of case that we dealt with in the brisa a few moments ago. And so before they had a chance to engage in nisuin, so he became a deaf mute. So now, even after they married, Eina Ochelas, she's not allowed to eat truma. Now, what happens? Nola Ben, they have a child. well, that child is a full-fledged Kohen. So now, Ocheles, she is allowed to eat Truma because she is the mother of a Kohen. And so even though her marital relationship with her husband has a defect in it that prevents her from eating Truma, as the mother of a Kohen, she's allowed to now eat Truma. Well, what happens if the child dies? Meis haben. Rabbi Nosson Omer Ocheles. Rabbi Nosson says she can continue to eat Truma, but Chachamim Omer Eino Ocheles. Whereas the Chachamim say, no, she's not allowed to eat Truma. So, okay. So my time of the Rabbi Nosson. So now that we finished giving the brisa, we want to understand what's Rabbi Nosson's rationale. So we're going to have two explanations of Rabbi Nosson's approach. So first is Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Hoel shekvar achla, that the reason that she's allowed to eat is because she already was eating. And so because she was already allowed to eat Truma, we're going to allow her to continue. Well, Abaye points out that that's not always the rule. So Amar le Abaye elamiata Yisrael shenisas lechohenu meisla. 1 second, a Yisraelite who marries a Kohen and then and of course is then able to eat Truma, and now the Kohen dies without any children. So now she's not allowed to eat any Truma. Well, Techel, she should be allowed to. Shekvar achla. She's but Ella Kevan de Meisle. But we say that once the husband dies, we remove his sanctity from her, and he's not considered, and she's not able to eat Truma. Well, Hachanami, Kevin de Mesla, Paka Kedusha Samina. Similarly, when the child dies, we should remove the sanctity from her. So it cannot be that is the reason. So Ella Amar Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef, who of course is Abaye's teacher, he offers now an alternative explanation. Kasav Rabbi Nassan, Nesuye Cherish Ma'achilin B'Truma. We actually, Rav Nassan holds that when a deaf mute actually does Nesuin, we do allow his wife to eat Truma. So again, we mentioned a Gezerah. We said that there is a Gezerah that we don't allow the wife in that situation to eat Truma because we're worried that maybe both the Kedushin and the Nesuin would happen while the Kohen is a Cherish. And in that situation, even though we allow the two to get married from a rabbinic perspective, we definitely do not allow her to eat Truma because it is not a biblical marriage.
So he can't eat, but she can?
No, a Cherish is allowed to eat Truma.
Okay, all right, okay.
The Logas Rina Nesuya Cherish, Atu Kedusha Cherish. And according to Rabbi Nassim, we do not make the Gezerah about the wife of a Cherish who did only Nesuin with her because we're worried about the Kedusha Cherish, because we're worried about somebody who does Kedushin with a Cherish. So Amar Le Abaye, 1 second. Ihachi Nola Ben Lamali. Why did this brisa need to mention a son? According to Rabbi Nassan, even without the son, the wife is able to eat Truma as long as only Nisuin was done with the Cherish, as long as the Pikeach did the Kiddushin, as long as the man was fully competent when the Kiddushin was done. So Rabbi Yosef explains, so Mishum Rabbanan, no, that was only because even the rabbis would agree that if she bears a child, then she is allowed to eat Truma. The Liflug Rabbi Nassan Alaya Beresha. So, why didn't Rabbi Nassan argue with the rabbis in the beginning? Meaning, they should, as soon as the rabbi said that that once the Cherish does Nesuin, that the wife cannot eat, that's the moment that Rabbi Nassan should have argued and chimed in that he disagrees. Well, Shavik Lahula Rabbanan Acha Misaima Milsaihu. He wanted to let the rabbis finish their teaching. V'hadar Poligalayu, and then he argued with them. Well, Ihachi, listen Mesa Ben Eino Cheles. Well, then he should have argued even when it said that if the child died, he may not eat, because Rabbi Nassan Omer Ocheles, and Rabbi Nassan would say that she can eat Truma because, of course, the marriage happened the kedushin happened when the Kohen was a bikeach, and so even though the nesuin happened when he was a cherish, so that's okay. Rabbi Nassan says we don't make the gzeira. Well, so let him argue only at the very end. And in fact, the Gemara points out, Kasha, no, you're right. That's a difficult aspect to Rav Yosef's explanation. We don't, interestingly, offer a third explanation. It's interesting because I would have thought that we could have answered the combination of that you need both aspects. You need both some aspect of being able to have had had the ability to and having some kedushin. But in any event, that is where the Gemara concludes on this particular point. So now we continue with the next excerpt from our Mishnah, and the second half of our Mishnah says, "V'chein haba al achas kol harayos." As I mentioned in the introduction, the Mishnah then continues and says basically the same rules apply for marital relations for when it comes to yavam for arayot as well. The same rules, meaning if you do it by accident, so then it's the same halacha, same problems. So Amar of Amram, Ha Milsa, Amar Alan, Rav Sheshis. So Rav Sheshis told us the following about this Mishnah. And he enlightened us from this Mishnah. And what was the statement? Ashes Yisrael Shenansa. If a Yisrael, a non-Kohen, has his wife unfortunately is raped, so Avalpi Shemuteres Leva'ala Psua L'Kohana, that even though she is allowed to stay with her husband, she is no longer going to be able to marry a Kohen. Meaning, if that first husband were to die, and so as a result, she would be able to marry a Kohen because she is she's a widow, not a divorcee. So that she would no longer be allowed to marry a Kohen. Additionally, even though if she were a Bas Kohen in that situation and she died without any children, and she's going back to her father's house, she's also not allowed to eat truma, the Tana tuna. And in fact, the Tana of our Mishnah, it was teaching this particular point, was highlighting this particular point by saying v'chein haba al achas mikol ha'arayos hamuras b'torah. That, and similarly, the same rule applies. Opsulos, or with somebody who is disqualified from marrying a Kohen. So my v'chein, what does that mean? V'chein, my love. Lo shna b'shogeg, lo shna b'mezes. It doesn't make a difference whether the marital relationship was voluntary or involuntary. The once one has lo shna b'onus, lo shna b'ratzon, doesn't make a difference whether it's done willingly or unwillingly. The point is that even if she was raped, where it was totally unwilling, we say that that's considered a disqualification from marrying a Kohen. So that was the proof, the fact that it says v'chein, so that was the teaching. But now we're going to offer three alternative explanations for v'chein. The first two will fall apart, but then the third one will say, actually, you don't have to agree with Rav Sheshis. Now, in fact, Rav Sheshis teaching is in fact the halacha, but the Gemara is showing that you don't have to say that our Mishnah is supportive of that position, even though Rav Sheshis believed so. So, you don't need to say that the Mishnah in fact supports Rav Sheshis. My v'chein, what is the v'chein teaching? It's talking about that initial, the beginning of the marital relationship process, that even that is considered a marital relation. So just as the beginning of marital relations constitutes marital relations for a rayot, it constitutes marital relations to disqualify a woman from marrying a Kohen. So, but then, one second, ha'ara deman. One second, what ha'ara are we talking about here? When you say that we're going to that it's going to disqualify a woman from kahuna, Ilema de arayos, if you say that we're talking about arayos, lememra de arayos yalfina miyavama, that would seem to imply the v'chein was telling us that not only is this true in connection with yavam, but it's also true in connection with arayos. But ba'adarabba, yavama yalfinun ma'arayos, when it came to the beginning of a marital relationship actually constituting a significant act, we learned it from Arias to Yavama. The Ikar Ha'ara, the Arias Ksiv, because the main source of the initial marital relationship was in connection with Arias. So as a result, the Vachain is going in the wrong direction. So Elamai Vachain, so we have to come up with a different explanation for Vachain. Ashalo Kedarka de Arias. It's talking about where you do not have marital relations in the normal manner, but rather, anal sex would be the definition of what's not normal, not the regular way. So, but 1 second, there too, adaraba, iker mishkevei isha ba'arayas ksiv. So similarly, the when it says mishkevei isha, the plural is indicating that both kedarka and shelo kedarka is covered. That was written by Arayos. So we're going in the wrong direction. So elamai v'chein, ashalo kedarka dechayve lavin. So it is talking about where you had lo kedarka, again, not the normal way of relations, but it was not with an arayot, which are the people that are prohibited with a kares or similar prohibition, but just with a lav. So that would be, for example, a kohen and a divorcee. So just as unusual marital relations constitutes marital relations for relationships forbidden only by a negative commandment, it would constitute marital relations to disqualify a woman from eating truma. Of course, a divorcee is already prohibited to marry a kohen, so it's not a total prohibition because that already existed. But it would mean that if she were the daughter of a kohen, she would no longer be able to go back to her father's house and eat truma. So as a result, the proof of Rav Sheshes is not a perfect proof, but again, we actually in the end say that the halacha follows Rav Sheshes. So Amar Rabba, so now we have another related teaching. Ishes Kohen Shenensa. What happens if you have the wife of a Kohen who is raped? Ba'ala loka aleha mishum zona. And now the husband doesn't want to give her up. He remains married to her. So Rabbah says that he gets lashes according, based on the fact that she's considered a zona. So mishum, what does that imply? That implies mishum zona in mishum tuma lo, that because she's a zona, she actually gets lashes, but because she had marital relations with somebody else, that is not a sufficient reason. In general, the idea is that we say that if in fact a woman has an extramarital affair, so then the husband's not, even a Yisrael husband is not allowed to stay with her, and that is because of tum'ah, of this what we defined here as defilement. The point is it's not classic tumah of impurity, but it's I guess related to that. But it's the idea is that she had an improper marital relationship, and so as a result, that's going to be a problem. So 1 second. So Ema Achmashum Zona. No, we can say that actually when a Rabbah said his statement, he means also because of Zona, meaning that there are two problems. So Mesiv Rabbi Zera, the Hilo Nispasa Asura. Well, 1 second. So Rabbi Zera challenges because we have a following brisa. It says in the pasuk in Bamidbar Hay that and she was not forced. This is in connection with the Sota discussion. So if she's not forced, implying Hanisbasa Muteres, meaning that if in fact she was forced, well then she's allowed to stay with her husband. But the Hilonis implies that only in certain circumstances is the fact that she was not forced does the fact that she was not forced allow her to stay with her husband. In other circumstances, even if she was forced, she would be forbidden to stay. And ve'ezo, and what's the situation where even if she was forced, she would be forbidden to stay with her husband? Zo Ashes Kohen. That would be the wife of a Kohen. Well, what did we just do here? We had a positive commandment associated with sota that implied a negative commandment in connection with the wife remaining with her Kohen husband. Well, we have a general principle, v'lav habam l'klal asay, that a prohibition that comes from a positive commandment is considered a positive commandment. And so as a result, this should not be considered a positive commandment at all. This should not be considered a negative commandment at all. So why should he get lashes associated with it? So Amaraba Hakol Hayu Bichlal Zona. No, when anybody who had marital relations with somebody who was not their husband, they are all included in the category of Zona. But then, when we had the specific rules with respect to the wife of a Yisrael, the Hilo Nispasa Asura, that if in fact she was not forced, that's when she's forbidden. Hanispasa Muteres. Then, if she was forced, she's permitted. So we have a special exclusion from the zone of prohibition. Miklal to Ashes Kohen to the Kaima. Whereas when you have this Ashes Kohen, when it's the wife of a Kohen, she remains in her situation. She remains considered in her forbidden status. She remains a zona. And so as a result, even though you just focus on the second half of this limud, you're learning limud from a positive commandment associated with sota. Fundamentally, it remains a negative commandment associated with zona. The Ikada Amri, an alternative understanding of this is Amaraba. He didn't say that it was Ashes Kohen Shenansa Bala Loka Allah Mishum Zona, but rather Bala Loka Allah Mishum Tuma. He said that the problem is because of Tuma. So Mishum Tuma in, Mishum Zona Lo. So the implication is that it's only because she had relations with a man who was not her husband, but she would not be considered a Zona. So Alma Ba'ones Lo Karina Bezona, that we don't consider somebody who had unwilling relations to be a Zona. Mesiv Rabbi Zera, so now Rabbi Zera again cites our brisa that we cited above. The Hilo Nispasa Asura. 1 second, what about the fact that we learn this all from the case of sota? Hanispasa muteris, v'yesh lecha acheres she'af al pi shenispasa useres asura ve'ezo ezo ashes kohen. So again, we learned the fact that the ashes kohen is prohibited all from the situation of sota, which is a positive commandment. V'lava bam l'klal asay asay. So again, we answer the exact same thing. Rabba would say, Hakol hayu b'chlal acharei asher hutama'a, that everything follows asher hutama'a. She was considered defiled. So the point is that we have the prohibition of defilement. We then have the sota telling us that defilement only applies to where she was not forced, but it only applies where she was not forced when the husband is a Yisrael. When the husband was a Kohen, even when she was forced, she's considered defiled, and as a result, would be prohibited.
She's defiled. What does it defiled mean?
Again, it's a tough situation. It's a very painful law, but basically the idea is that because she had marital relationships with a man that was not her husband, she is not considered. She is considered on some way. Exactly as the word suggests, defiled. There's some taint to her. Now, that taint only applies to a Kohen. It does not apply to the Israel husband.
Yeah, I think it's possible to phrase it without blame or something. It's just like a status as opposed to, to say she's a zona is to imply.
Correct. The zona, and you're right. The second approach is, you're absolutely right. It makes a lot of sense to go follow that second approach, to say that she's not considered a zona. She's only considered in this tainted status, and that it's a status, and we're not trying to attribute any blame to her. You're absolutely. I think that's certainly the thrust of the Ika de Amri, is to take that away. You're absolutely right. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah. We'll do the Mishnah, and with that, we'll complete today. So the next Mishnah teaches Almana leChohen Gadol. If a widow marries a Kohen Gadol, and of course the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a widow. Grusha v'chalutza leChohen Hedjot, or a divorcee or a chalutza marries a regular Kohen. Min ha'erusin lo yochlu b'truma. That if the wife was able to eat truma, so we're talking about a bas kohen that was already able to eat truma. Once she does erusin, the Tanna Kama says she's no longer able to eat truma, because she's engaged in a marriage that is an imperfect marriage. Now, even though ordinarily after erusin you're not allowed to eat truma, if you marry a regular Kohen and you're a Bas Yisrael, and in fact a Bas Kohen is ordinarily, even if she does erusin with a non-Kohen, is allowed to eat truma. We're basically saying, because we know that you're going to eventually have marital relationships that will cause you to become disqualified, we're going to start the disqualification earlier. But Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon machshirin. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon disagree. They say that in fact you can she can continue to eat truma. V'nis armalu o niskarshu. Now, what happens if these women who were forbidden to their kohanim husbands become widowed or divorced? So min hanisuas psulos. If they in fact had done nisuin and they had been fully married, well then they are no longer able to eat truma. Min ha'erusin ksheris. But if they were only widowed or divorced from the state of erusin, meaning that they never actually engaged in the marital relations, they never actually finished the marriage process, well then they will be able to eat truma, and they in fact will not be prohibited from marrying a Kohen in a second situation. And so as a result, we'll talk about this and go through the logic of both positions, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Great to have you with us, Hanan. Great to have you with us. As always, Stan. See you all. See you tomorrow.
Yeah. Bye.